Black teen is arrested by a racist cop. He regrets it when Snoop Dogg shows up the next day to save him. The handcuffs dug into Malik's wrists as Officer Matthews shoved him into the back of the squad car. His heart pounded in his chest. What had just happened? 1 minute, he was walking down the street, trying to head home from the corner store, and the next, he was being arrested for absolutely nothing. "You're making a big mistake," Malik tried to say, but Officer Matthews wasn't listening. The cop was too busy glaring at him, muttering something under his breath that Malik couldn't quite catch. Malik didn't know what he'd done to deserve this. Was it because of the hoodie he wore? The fact that he was a black teen in a mostly white neighborhood? The way the cop had looked at him when he first saw him? All those thoughts raced through Malik's mind. "Shut up," Officer Matthews snapped, slamming the door behind Malik, cutting him off from the outside world. Malik's eyes widened as the officer climbed into the front seat, starting the car with a loud roar. It didn't make sense. How had everything spiraled so quickly? Just yesterday, everything was normal. Malik was a regular teenager who went to high school, hung out with his friends, and stayed out of trouble. But today, here he was, being taken to jail for what? For walking while black. The squad car hummed down the street, lights flashing behind them. Malik tried to breathe, tried to calm himself, but the fear kept rising. This was real. This wasn't just some bad dream. The worst part? He had no idea how this was going to end. The night before, Malik had been scrolling through his phone, laughing at memes, and talking to his cousin when he heard his mom yelling from downstairs. The argument had been over money. His mom worked 2 jobs and still struggled to keep the bills paid. Malik had tried to avoid getting involved, but it was hard not to. Things had been tough for his family for as long as he could remember. "Stay out of this, Malik," his mom had said after a particularly heated argument with his dad. He'd gone for a walk to clear his head. He didn't think anyone would notice, especially not the cops. But he was wrong. Officer Matthews had seen him walking on the sidewalk and immediately decided he was up to something suspicious. Malik knew the drill. It wasn't the first time a cop had stopped him for no reason. When Matthews pulled up beside him, Malik had been confused. The officer had asked him where he was going, but before Malik could answer, Matthews started throwing accusations. He said Malik was acting suspicious, that he looked like trouble. Malik had tried to stay calm, to explain, but it didn't matter. The officer didn't care about his side of the story. "I didn't do anything wrong," Malik tried again, his voice shaking. "I'm just walking home." But it was no use. Matthews had pulled him over, searched his pockets, and found nothing. Still, he'd made the decision to arrest Malik. The officer had no reason. But that didn't matter. To Matthews, Malik was just another black teen to intimidate, another person to keep in their place. As the car sped through the streets, Malik's stomach twisted. He looked out the window, trying to focus on anything other than the fear building up inside of him. What was going to happen next? Would anyone believe his side of the story? Just as Malik thought he couldn't take it anymore, the squad car turned a corner and parked outside the police station. His breath caught in his throat. Was this it? Was he really about to be thrown into a cell for no reason? But then, just as Officer Matthews was about to open the door and pull Malik out, something unexpected happened. The sound of an engine revving echoed in the air. A black SUV screeched to a halt right in front of the police station. The door swung open, and out stepped none other than Snoop Dogg. Malik's eyes widened. Was that really him? His mind raced. Was this some kind of joke? Was he dreaming? Snoop Dogg, the legendary rapper and activist, stood there, looking cool as ever. He had a serious expression on his face, and he wasn't alone. A few other people, including the lawyer, were with him. Malik felt a glimmer of hope. Could Snoop really be here to help him? But what did Snoop Dogg have to do with him? Malik had no idea. The last thing he expected was for a celebrity to show up out of nowhere. His heart raced even faster. Why was Snoop here? Was he about to save Malik from the mess he was in? Before Malik could ask any more questions, Snoop Dogg walked right up to the squad car, his eyes locked on Officer Matthews. Malik could hear his voice clearly, his words calm but full of power. "I think you got the wrong kid, officer," Snoop said. "Let him go." Everything seemed to slow down. Malik could hardly believe his ears. What was happening? Was this real life? He watched as Officer Matthews hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Malik's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the end of his nightmare? But Officer Matthews didn't back down. Instead, he glared at Snoop Dogg. "I'm just doing my job," he said, his voice tight. "This kid's been acting suspicious." "Suspicious, huh?" Snoop Dogg said, raising an eyebrow. "And just what does that mean?" "You got nothing on him. No reason to arrest him." Malik couldn't believe it. Snoop Dogg wasn't just standing there. He was standing up for him. For a moment, it felt like time had frozen. The tension between Snoop Dogg and the cop was thick. Malik wanted to jump out of the car and hug Snoop, but he stayed still, afraid to move. What if things got worse? What if the officer didn't back down? Just as Officer Matthews started to say something else, a voice broke through the silence. "Hey, what's going on here?" The voice was deep, familiar, and filled with authority. Another cop stepped out of the station, looking confused. Snoop Dogg didn't move, still standing strong. His eyes locked on the new officer, who seemed to take a moment to process the situation. Malik's heart was racing. Was this it? Was the officer about to do something crazy? Would Snoop be able to get him out of this? What was going to happen next? The new officer, Officer Harris, glanced between Snoop Dogg and Officer Matthews. He was younger than Matthews, probably in his 30s, but his eyes were sharp. He had clearly just come off his shift and didn't seem to expect this kind of scene outside the station. But when he noticed the group around the squad car, Snoop Dogg, the lawyer, and the small crowd starting to gather, he seemed to realize something was wrong. "What's going on here, Matthews?" Officer Harris asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Officer Matthews stood frozen, not expecting to be questioned by one of his own colleagues. For a moment, it looked like he might say something, but he just stared at Snoop Dogg, then back at Officer Harris. His face was flushed with frustration. "This kid," Matthews said, pointing at Malik, "was acting suspicious. I was just doing my job." Snoop Dogg took a step forward, his presence commanding attention. Acting suspicious? All this kid was doing was walking down the street. What's suspicious about that? Officer Matthews gritted his teeth, clearly not happy about being called out. He tried to regain control of the situation. "I've got a gut feeling about this." "All right. We've had problems in this area before. I was just being cautious." A murmur rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Some of them had stopped their cars, while others were watching from their porches. The word racial profiling floated in the air, unspoken but clear in the looks exchanged between them. They knew what was happening here. Malik knew it too. "Listen," Officer Harris said, holding up his hand, signaling for Matthews to be quiet. He turned to Malik. "What's your name, son?" "Malik Johnson," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "All right, Malik," Officer Harris said, nodding. "You don't have a record, do you?" "No, sir," Malik answered quickly. "I'm just trying to get home." Snoop Dogg, standing behind Malik, gave a small nod of approval. Malik could feel a surge of gratitude, but he also couldn't shake the fear that lingered in the pit of his stomach. He had no idea how this was going to end. Officer Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out his radio and made a quick call. He asked for confirmation on Malik's identity. Malik had been worried for a second that they might try to dig up some minor charge or mistake in his record to justify the arrest. But a few moments later, Harris was speaking into his radio again, sounding more assured. "All right," Officer Harris said, putting the radio away. "Everything checks out. There's no reason to arrest this kid." He turned to Matthews, his tone stern. "You can't just arrest someone because of a gut feeling, Matthews. That's not how we do things." Malik's heart leaped at Harris's words. Was this really happening? Was he going to be let go? But before he could relax, Officer Matthews, still fuming, shot one last glare at Snoop Dogg. "You've got no idea what it's like around here," Matthews growled, his jaw clenched. "We have to be tough on crime. You're a celebrity. You don't know what we deal with." Snoop Dogg didn't flinch. His eyes never left Matthews. "I know exactly what you deal with, man. And you're not doing anyone any favors by treating people like criminals just because of the way they look or where they live. That's not policing. That's bullying." The air around them seemed to crackle. The tension was unbearable. For a moment, it looked like Matthews might snap, but then, something unexpected happened. Officer Harris stepped forward, his voice firm but level. "That's enough, Matthews," he said, putting a hand on Matthews' shoulder. "You got your suspicions, but they're not enough to hold this kid. I'm calling it. Let him go." Matthews didn't say anything. His face was red with anger, but he knew he couldn't argue with his colleague. He turned away, muttering under his breath, and walked back toward the station without another word. Malik stood there, still in shock, as Officer Harris stepped aside. Snoop Dogg walked up to the car, his face softening just a little. "You all right, Malik?" he asked, his voice much calmer now. Malik nodded, still trying to process everything. "I don't know what just happened," he admitted. "You don't have to know everything right now," Snoop said with a reassuring smile. "But you should know this. You're not alone out here. People see what's going on, and you got rights. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Malik's eyes watered for a moment. For the first time all evening, he felt like he could breathe. Snoop Dogg had just stood up for him in front of the cops. He had just prevented something that could have ruined Malik's life for no reason at all. "Thanks, man," Malik said, his voice cracking a little. "I don't know how to thank you." Snoop Dogg clapped him on the back. "No need to thank me. You just gotta do your part too. Stay out of trouble, keep your head up, and speak up when you need to." Malik couldn't believe it. Snoop wasn't just a rapper. He was a real person, someone who cared about what was going on in the world. He wasn't here to make a scene. He was here to make sure justice was done. But as Malik stepped out of the squad car, he looked back at the police station, his mind still racing. The night had started out so normal. How had it gone from a simple walk to an arrest? And now, how had Snoop Dogg ended up standing up for him? What did this all mean? The crowd around them began to disperse, and the police station returned to its usual quiet. But the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. Snoop Dogg looked at Malik one last time. "You good?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm good," Malik replied, his voice full of disbelief. He wasn't sure how to explain it, but something had changed inside him. Something had shifted. He didn't know what it was yet, but he knew he wasn't going to forget this night. He wasn't going to forget how a celebrity had used his power to do something real, something that mattered. "All right," Snoop said, nodding as he turned to leave. "Take care of yourself, Malik." As Snoop got into his SUV and drove off, Malik watched him disappear into the night. For the first time in hours, Malik felt a small sense of peace. The nightmare was over. But just as he turned to walk away, a voice called out to him from behind. "Hey, Malik." "Hold up." It was Officer Harris. Malik froze, his stomach tightening. Had he done something wrong after all? "Just wanted to let you know," Officer Harris said, walking up to him with a smile. "I've got your back too, if you ever need anything." Malik didn't know how to respond. A cop backing him up? Was this some kind of trick? Thanks, officer," Malik stammered, unsure of what this meant. Harris nodded, his expression softening. "Stay safe out there. And if you ever feel like you're being treated unfairly again, don't hesitate to reach out. You don't have to go through it alone." For a moment, Malik just stood there, trying to make sense of everything. He had been so scared. But now, with Snoop Dogg's support and Officer Harris seeming to genuinely care, Malik was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for change. He looked up at the sky, the weight of the night starting to lift, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't powerless. But that wasn't the end. The story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Something still felt off. Something still didn't sit right. There were still questions unanswered. Why had Officer Matthews gone to such extremes? And what did Snoop Dogg's intervention mean for Malik's future? As he walked down the street, his mind raced, and in the distance, the sound of approaching sirens broke through the silence of the night. What now? Would this all just blow over, or was this the beginning of something even bigger? And just when Malik thought he could put it all behind him, a figure appeared ahead on the street, someone he didn't expect to see again. Malik's steps slowed as he saw the figure in the distance, walking slowly toward him. His heart skipped a beat. He recognized that person. It was Officer Matthews. What was he doing out here? Malik had just been released, and everything had seemed like it was finally getting back to normal. But now, seeing Matthews walking toward him again, the knot in Malik's stomach twisted. Was the cop looking for revenge? Was he going to start trouble again? Malik braced himself. He felt the weight of the night pressing down on him again, like a shadow following him, even after Snoop Dogg had made it go away, at least for the moment. "Hey, Malik," Officer Matthews called out, his voice sounding low and almost casual. Malik stopped walking and turned to face him. He felt uneasy, but he didn't want to show fear. "What do you want, Matthews?" Malik asked, his voice shaky, but he tried to sound firm. "Aren't you done with me?" Matthews stopped just a few feet away, his eyes scanning the street as though making sure no one else was watching. His expression was hard to read. Malik couldn't tell if he was still angry, if he was embarrassed, or if he was trying to be nice. "You're lucky," Matthews said after a long pause, his voice quieter now. "You should be thankful that Snoop Dogg showed up when he did. I wasn't going to let you off the hook so easily." Malik's heart sank. What was he hearing? Matthews sounded like he was admitting it, admitting that the whole arrest had been about something more than just doing his job. It wasn't about suspicion. It was about something deeper, something Malik didn't fully understand yet. "You think you could just get away with this?" Malik shot back, his anger starting to rise. "You think you can treat me like a criminal just because you feel like it?" Officer Matthews didn't react at first. He just looked down, his hands tucked into the pockets of his uniform. For a second, Malik thought he might just turn around and walk away again. But Matthews lifted his head, locking eyes with Malik. "I didn't want to arrest you," Matthews said, and there was something in his voice that made Malik pause. It wasn't the harsh, aggressive tone from earlier. This was almost regret. "But you don't understand what it's like. There are rules. There's a system in place, and sometimes I have to follow it, even if it feels wrong. It's not personal." Malik narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of what Matthews was saying. "So you arrest people because the system tells you to? You don't think for yourself?" Matthews hesitated. "It's not that simple," he muttered, looking away. "You wouldn't understand." "Then help me understand," Malik pressed. "If you know what you did was wrong, why keep doing it? Why keep treating people like me like criminals?" For a long moment, Matthews didn't answer. Malik stood there, waiting. He wasn't sure if he wanted an answer anymore, but he couldn't just let it go. Not after everything that had happened. Finally, Matthews let out a deep sigh. "You're right," he said quietly. I didn't want to do it, but there are times when we get caught up in the system, and I let that cloud my judgment." Malik felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected, sympathy. He knew that Matthews wasn't the only cop acting this way. He wasn't the only one caught up in a system that often treated people like Malik unfairly. But hearing Matthews admit it, that was something else. Malik wasn't sure what to do with this new information. "I don't want to be the bad guy," Matthews added, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never did. But sometimes it feels like no matter how hard you try to do the right thing, everything's stacked against you." Malik wasn't sure how to respond to that. He wasn't sure if he could forgive Matthews for what had happened, for what he had almost put him through. But this was different. This wasn't the angry cop Malik had met earlier. This was someone who was struggling. Someone who felt trapped in a system that wasn't working for him, either. "You're a cop," Malik said slowly, still unsure. "You have the power to make things better. You don't have to let the system control you." Matthews nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes now. I know I'm part of the problem, Malik, and I don't have an easy answer for how to fix it, but I'm trying to figure it out. I need time." Malik didn't know what to say. He could feel the weight of the conversation between them. Something deeper than just the arrest. Something that spoke to the bigger issues that they both faced. But Malik wasn't sure if Matthews could really change. He wasn't sure if the system would ever change. It was too big, too complicated, and too corrupt for anyone to fix it overnight. "I don't know if I believe you," Malik said softly, "but I hope you figure it out, because the way you treat people like me, it's not right." There was silence for a long moment. Malik didn't know if he was waiting for an apology or some kind of resolution. He wasn't sure what he needed from Officer Matthews. But all he could do was stare at the man who had almost ruined his life, who had stood in front of him and admitted his mistakes in a way that Malik didn't know how to respond to. Finally, Matthews spoke again, his voice quieter than ever. "I'm sorry, Malik. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I am sorry. I'll try harder next time." Malik stood still, his mind racing. Was this the end of the conversation? Was Matthews truly sorry? Or was he just saying the words to get out of this awkward moment? Without another word, Matthews turned and started walking back toward the station. Malik watched him go, still unsure of what had just happened. Part of him wanted to believe that Matthews could change. But another part of him knew that change didn't happen easily. Malik stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. The night was quiet again, but his mind was anything but. The weight of what had happened still hung heavy in the air. He had faced down a corrupt cop and had been saved by a celebrity, but there was still so much more to figure out. As he began walking home again, he felt the eyes of the neighborhood on him. People knew what had happened. Word would spread fast, but Malik couldn't focus on them right now. He needed to think. He needed to understand everything he had just experienced, because it wasn't over yet. Far from it. As he rounded the corner, he saw something he hadn't expected. A familiar face stood in the street ahead of him, waiting. The figure was tall, dressed in black, and Malik felt a jolt of recognition. It was his cousin, Deshaun. Deshaun was always the one who had his back. He had been the one to teach Malik how to hold his own when things got tough. And now, as Deshaun stood there, waiting with a serious look on his face, Malik knew something was coming. "What's up?" Malik asked, walking toward him cautiously. Deshaun didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around quickly, as if making sure no one was following them. Then he stepped forward, his voice low. "We need to talk, Malik. It's about what happened tonight. You're not gonna believe it, but there's something you need to know." Malik's heart skipped a beat. What could be worse than what had already happened? And why was Deshaun acting so serious? "Something's going down," Deshaun said, his eyes scanning the street, "and you're in the middle of it." Malik felt a chill run down his spine. Was this all just the beginning of something bigger? The air around them seemed to grow colder, and Malik could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His heart raced again. What had Deshaun found out? And what was about to happen next? Malik's mind raced as he stared at his cousin, Deshaun. There was a seriousness in his eyes that Malik had never seen before. Deshaun wasn't one to get worked up over small things. If he was this serious, it could only mean one thing. Something big was happening. Something Malik wasn't prepared for. "What's going on, Deshaun?" Malik asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you mean? Something's going down." Deshaun glanced around, his eyes darting nervously over his shoulder as if expecting someone to jump out from the shadows. He took a deep breath before answering, lowering his voice even further. "I don't want to scare you, Malik, but you need to know what's coming. After tonight, things are gonna get a lot more complicated." Malik's chest tightened. "What are you talking about? Is it about Matthews? About what happened with Snoop Dogg?" Deshaun nodded, but he didn't look reassured. "It's bigger than that. Way bigger." He paused, his expression growing darker. "Look, we're not the only ones who saw what went down tonight. People have been watching. And now there's gonna be fallout. Trust me, this isn't just some random bad cop acting out of line. It's bigger. There are people who are going to use what happened as a way to push something much more dangerous." Malik's head was spinning. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Dangerous? What are you saying?" Deshaun stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're trying to use everything that happened tonight. Your arrest, the way Snoop showed up, everything. To stir up a whole lot of tension in the community. Matthews is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole network of people who want to keep things like this going. They want to keep the divide alive, and they're not going to let something like this just slide." Malik's heart pounded. Was Deshaun talking about a conspiracy? A cover-up? It was hard to wrap his mind around. "So, you're saying this isn't just about me? It's about something bigger." Deshaun's eyes locked onto Malik's, his voice steady but urgent. "Exactly. This isn't just about you, Malik. It's about a system that doesn't want to change, and people who will do anything to make sure it stays the way it is." Malik stood there for a moment, trying to absorb the weight of what Deshaun was saying. He had always known that things weren't perfect, that there were problems in the world, especially when it came to race and justice. But hearing that this was part of something bigger, something with more layers, shook him to the core. He didn't know if he was ready for this. He didn't even know where to begin. "So, what do we do now?" Malik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Deshaun sighed, glancing down the street once more to make sure they were still alone. "We need to lay low for now. Keep your head down. Let the heat die down a little. But soon, we'll need to make a decision. There's gonna be pressure. And when it comes, we need to be ready to fight back. But not just any fight. This is bigger than one bad cop. It's about changing the way people see each other. Changing how things are done. And it's going to take all of us." Malik's mind was spinning. He wanted to be brave, to stand up for what was right, but this was more than just standing up to a cop. This was a whole fight, a fight that might be too big for him to handle on his own. "Do you think Snoop knows about all this?" Malik asked, his voice uncertain. Deshaun gave a half smile. "Oh, he knows. He's been involved in stuff like this for years. But that's not the point. What matters is what you do with what happened tonight. You've got a choice now. You can either go back to living your life and let this fade away, or you can use it to push for real change." Malik swallowed hard. He couldn't imagine going back to how things were. Not after tonight. Not after everything he had seen. But was he ready for the kind of fight Deshaun was talking about? What would that even look like? Before Malik could respond, a sound broke through his thoughts. A car door slamming. Malik's head snapped to the side. In the distance, the familiar flash of police lights flickered at the end of the block. His stomach sank. "Damn it," Deshaun muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We need to move. Now." Malik didn't need to be told twice. The police were back. But what did this mean? Were they coming for him again? Or was it something worse? Deshaun grabbed Malik's arm and started pulling him down the alleyway. The sounds of the sirens grew louder as they moved, the echo bouncing off the buildings around them. Malik's heart was racing, and fear started to creep back into his bones. Had they come to arrest him again? Or was this something connected to the bigger plan Deshaun was talking about? They kept moving, their footsteps quick and urgent. But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The alley was dark, the shadows playing tricks on him. For a moment, he felt like he was back in that squad car, trapped, powerless. But Deshaun was ahead of him now, pulling him faster. "Come on, we need to get to the car. Fast." Malik didn't ask questions. He just followed. They reached the end of the alley, where Deshaun had parked his car in a hidden spot. Deshaun got in first and started the engine. But Malik hesitated for a second, glancing over his shoulder toward the distant flashing lights. "Are we sure this is the right move?" Malik asked, his voice tense. Deshaun's face was set in determination. "We don't have a choice, Malik. They're already coming for you. If we don't get out now, we'll be stuck in this mess for good." Malik didn't argue. He slid into the passenger seat, and before he could take another breath, Deshaun slammed the gas pedal, and the car shot off into the night, leaving the flashing lights behind. But as they turned the corner and sped away, Malik's thoughts still raced. What did Deshaun know that Malik didn't? Who was coming for him? And why now, after everything had seemed to settle down? He glanced over at his cousin, who was focused on the road ahead. "Deshaun, what's really going on? Who's behind this? Why are they after me?" Deshaun's grip on the wheel tightened. He didn't answer right away, his eyes fixed straight ahead as the car weaved through the city streets. Then, finally, he spoke. His voice was grim. "You remember when we were talking about change, Malik? About the system?" Malik nodded, still trying to piece it all together. Deshaun let out a sharp breath. "It's not just about cops like Matthews. It's about the people pulling the strings behind the scenes, the ones who keep the system broken. And right now, they're watching you. Watching us." Malik's heart dropped. "You mean, there are people who want to stop everything from changing? Like they don't want us to stand up?" "Exactly," Deshaun said, glancing at Malik for a brief second. "And they'll do whatever it takes to keep the power in their hands. They don't care how they do it. They'll go after you. They'll go after anyone who stands in their way." The weight of Deshaun's words settled over Malik like a cold, heavy blanket. This wasn't just about a bad cop. This wasn't just about one night. This was a battle for the future, for fairness, for equality. And Malik was right in the middle of it. "How do we fight back?" Malik asked, his voice more determined now, the fear slowly turning into something else. Something like resolve. Deshaun gave him a hard look, his eyes sharp as steel. "We fight smart. We stay ahead of them. We find the people who are ready to make a real change, and we don't let anyone stop us." The car sped on through the dark streets, but Malik knew one thing for sure now. This was just the beginning. The fight was coming, and he was going to have to be ready. He wasn't just some kid caught in the wrong place, at the wrong time anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that was going to shake the world. And no one was going to stop him from fighting for what was right. The car sped down the dark, empty streets, the headlights cutting through the night like a beacon of urgency. Malik's mind was still reeling from everything Deshaun had just told him. People were after him, people who controlled everything. And now, it wasn't just a matter of surviving the system, it was about changing it, fighting it. Malik looked out the window, watching the passing streetlights blur by. But his thoughts were far from the outside world. The weight of what Deshaun had said kept turning over in his mind. They're watching you. Watching us. Who exactly were they? And why was he suddenly the target? Deshaun had spoken in a way that made it clear this wasn't just about Malik's arrest. It was bigger. Too big. As big as the system itself, maybe bigger. He was about to get involved in something that could change everything. Or end everything. The sound of Deshaun's steady breathing was the only sound in the car. Malik shifted in his seat, trying to process everything. Deshaun. Malik finally broke the silence, his voice tight. Who are we really up against? Who are these people that want to keep everything the way it is? And why me? What did I do? Deshaun glanced at him for a second before keeping his eyes back on the road. His jaw tightened. We're up against a lot of things, Malik. The system, the laws, the people who have power and don't want to lose it. You might have thought tonight was about you, but it's not. It's about what you represent. You represent a change they're scared of. Malik shifted again, leaning his elbow against the car door, feeling his heart race. This wasn't just about his arrest. This wasn't even about the cop, Matthews. It was bigger. Change. Malik repeated. What kind of change are you talking about? Deshaun's grip tightened on the wheel. The kind of change that starts with people who've had enough. You saw how the system treated you, right? How people like Matthews see us. They look at us like we're nothing more than trouble. But people are waking up, Malik. They're starting to see things differently, and that scares the people who have power. Malik didn't say anything at first. He couldn't fully grasp what Deshaun was telling him. Could it really be that simple? Could his arrest really have been a trigger for something much bigger? The thought made his stomach churn, but then it hit him. Snoop Dogg had shown up to help him. The celebrity, the icon. He didn't just show up to give Malik some attention. No, Snoop Dogg had shown up because he knew what was at stake. He understood the larger picture. He'd been a part of it for years. Snoop Dogg had been on the front lines of change for a long time, speaking out against the system, advocating for the oppressed, pushing boundaries in ways most people wouldn't dare. That's why he had come to Malik's aid. Malik looked at Deshaun, his voice steady now. So you're saying that the people in charge, the ones who want to keep the power, are watching us because they're scared of what's coming. They're scared of people like me, right? Deshaun didn't look at Malik as he nodded. Exactly. They're scared of young people like you, people who won't stand by and let the world continue as it is. And they'll do whatever they can to stop you before it even gets started. Malik's pulse quickened. What do we do? How do we stop them? Deshaun didn't answer right away, and for a second, Malik felt like he had asked the wrong question. But then, Deshaun spoke, his voice steady but grim. We don't stop them. We outsmart them. Malik was confused. Outsmart them? How? By staying one step ahead. The moment you make a move, they'll try to silence you. But we have to make moves that they don't expect. We need to hit them where it hurts. Malik blinked, trying to process everything. It was a lot to take in, and it was happening fast. Just hours ago, he was sitting in his room, wondering what the rest of the summer would be like. Now here he was, fighting against a system that wanted to crush people like him, and he wasn't sure he was ready. But what choice did he have? All right, Malik said, his voice firmer than before. What's the first step? Deshaun finally pulled the car off the main road and onto a quieter street. He slowed the vehicle and turned into an alley, parking in the shadows between two buildings. The city was quiet here, the streets empty, and Malik could hear the faint hum of the city in the distance. We wait, Deshaun said. We lay low for now. Let them think we're gone, that we're just a couple of kids trying to survive. But we're not just surviving anymore. We're in this fight now. Malik nodded, still not sure if he fully understood, but willing to trust his cousin. He had to. Who else is involved in this? Malik asked, his voice a little quieter now. Are there more people who feel the way you do? Who want to fight the system? Deshaun hesitated before responding. Yeah, there are, but it's not just about numbers. It's about finding the right people, the ones who can make a difference, the ones who aren't afraid to speak out. And right now, you're the one they're watching. Malik frowned. Me? I don't even know what to do. I'm just a kid. I don't have a platform like Snoop. Deshaun looked at him with a steady gaze. You might not have a platform yet, but you've got something better. Your voice. You've already started speaking up, Malik. You've got people listening. And you need to keep speaking, no matter what. The weight of his words settled in Malik's chest. his voice. That was the thing. That was what could make a difference. People listened to those who had the courage to speak out. All right, Malik said slowly, his mind beginning to clear. So we just keep moving forward. We don't let them stop us, and we make sure people hear us. Deshaun nodded. Exactly. Just then, Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out quickly, and his eyes widened when he saw the text. It was from a number he didn't recognize. It's about to go down. Stay ready. Malik stared at the message, his heart beating faster. Who was this? And what did they mean by it's about to go down? Was this the start of something bigger? Before he could reply, his phone buzzed again. Another message. We'll meet tonight. Midnight. Be at the old warehouse by the river. Don't trust anyone. They're already watching you. The text sent a chill down Malik's spine. Deshaun leaned over to see the message, his brow furrowing. Who's this? I don't know, Malik said, his voice tight. But it looks like someone knows what's going on. Someone else who's watching. Deshaun didn't hesitate. We're going. We need to find out who's behind this. And we need to figure out if we could trust them. Malik's stomach tightened. What if it's a setup? Deshaun met his eyes. Then we'll be ready for it. Just trust me. Malik nodded slowly, though a knot of fear was building in his chest. This was it. The first real test. There was no turning back now. As Deshaun started the car again, Malik couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening. They were moving into dangerous territory, and things were about to get even more complicated. Whatever was waiting for them at that warehouse by the river, Malik knew this was just the beginning. The real fight was about to start, and he wasn't backing down. The drive to the old warehouse was tense. The city lights blurred as they passed, flickering in the rearview mirror like memories fading into the distance. Malik's mind raced with questions. Who had sent the messages? What did they mean by "they're already watching you"? Were these people part of the same system Deshaun had warned him about, or were they someone else entirely? He glanced at Deshaun, who was gripping the wheel with a firm, unblinking focus. His cousin hadn't said much since they left the alley, and Malik could tell he was just as on edge as he was. What do you think? Malik asked, trying to break the silence. Do you think it's a trap? Deshaun didn't look at him. Could be. But we don't know who sent those texts yet. Could be someone with good intentions, or someone trying to get us caught. Either way, we've got to find out. Malik nodded. The air in the car felt heavy, thick with the tension of the unknown. The old warehouse was near the river, on the outskirts of the city, a place Malik had only seen in passing. It was abandoned, run down, exactly the kind of place that could hide a lot of secrets. And that's exactly what Malik feared. By the time they reached the area, the city's noise faded, replaced by the sound of the distant river rushing in the dark. The streets became narrow, empty, and quiet. The warehouse loomed ahead, an old industrial building with broken windows, its outline barely visible in the night. Deshaun slowed the car and parked a few blocks away, just out of sight. He killed the engine, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Are you ready for this? Deshaun finally asked, his voice low. Malik took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. I don't know, but I don't think we have a choice. Exactly, Deshaun replied, and then he reached for the glove compartment. He pulled out a flashlight and handed it to Malik. Let's keep it quiet. No lights unless we have to. Malik took the flashlight, feeling the weight of it in his hand. He wasn't sure what was waiting for them at the warehouse, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't going to be simple. They got out of the car and began walking toward the warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the soft gravel beneath their shoes. The cold night air cut through Malik's jacket, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. They approached the large, rusted metal door of the warehouse. There was no sign of movement, no sounds except for the faint hum of traffic in the distance and the rushing water of the river. It felt like the kind of place where anything could be hidden, anyone could be hiding. Deshaun reached for the door handle, his hand pausing just before it made contact. He glanced at Malik. Stay close. If anything feels off, we leave. Got it? Malik nodded, his pulse quickening as Deshaun slowly pushed open the door. It creaked loudly, breaking the silence like a gunshot. The inside of the warehouse was dark and musty. Old crates were stacked in corners, and the air smelled of rust and dust. Malik's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the floor, the walls and up to the rafters. There was a faint sense of decay, like no one had been here in years. Deshaun moved carefully through the shadows, his eyes scanning every corner of the space. Malik stuck close behind, his flashlight shaking a little in his hand. Every creak of the wooden floor beneath their feet sounded like a warning. "Anyone here?" Deshaun called softly into the darkness. His voice echoed, but no reply came. They walked deeper into the warehouse, and Malik felt the weight of the silence pressing in on them. It was as if the walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. But what? Suddenly, there was a noise, footsteps behind them. Malik spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure stepped out from the shadows, cloaked in darkness. "Who's there?" Deshaun's voice was sharp, demanding. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, the person stepped forward, just enough for the flashlight to catch a glimpse of them. A tall figure, wearing a black hoodie and jeans, their face obscured by a mask. "Who are you?" Deshaun demanded again, his hand instinctively moving toward the pocket where he kept his phone. The figure stood still for a moment before speaking, their voice low but clear. "You're looking for the truth, but you're not going to find it here." Malik's chest tightened, his mind raced. Who was this person? And what did they mean by the truth? "I don't know what you're talking about," Malik said, his voice a little more cautious than he intended. "We got a message. We're here to find out who sent it." The figure didn't move, but their voice softened. "You came to the right place, but you're not ready for what's coming." Deshaun's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, trying to get a better look at the person. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" Before the figure could answer, a loud crash came from the back of the warehouse, making both Malik and Deshaun jump. It was followed by more sounds, shuffling, murmurs, the scrape of metal against concrete. The figure looked behind them, then back at Malik and Deshaun. "They're here." Suddenly, several more figures appeared from the shadows, surrounding them. Malik's heart skipped a beat. These people weren't here to help. They were part of something else. Deshaun raised his hands, trying to keep the situation from escalating. "Listen, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. We're not here to cause trouble." One of the masked figures stepped forward, and this time, Malik could hear the hint of something cold in their voice. "You shouldn't have come. You don't know who you're dealing with." A chill ran down Malik's spine. Whoever these people were, they weren't friendly, and the more they moved in, the less safe Malik felt. "Deshaun," Malik whispered, his voice low. He wasn't sure what to do. He felt trapped, like there was no way out of this mess. Deshaun's eyes flicked around the room, and Malik saw his cousin's mind working, calculating their next move. "We need to get out of here," Deshaun muttered, his voice barely audible. The figure who had first spoken took a step closer. "You're not leaving. Not until you understand what's really happening." Before Malik could react, a loud bang sounded from the back of the warehouse. A figure in a black suit stepped into the light, their face covered by dark sunglasses, even though it was well past midnight. Deshaun's eyes narrowed when he saw the figure. "You," he growled. "I knew it." The figure smiled, slowly. "You're not as clueless as I thought." The voice was smooth, calculated, like it had been rehearsed. "But this is just the beginning. What happened to Malik tonight? That was only a small part of the plan." Malik froze. "What plan?" His voice was a mix of confusion and fear. The figure pushed the sunglasses up, revealing eyes that were too calm for comfort. "The plan that's been in motion for years. And now, you're going to help us finish it." Malik's blood ran cold. "Finish it?" Before he could ask more questions, a flash of light, blinding, overwhelming, exploded through the room. The figure in the suit looked alarmed, and for a split second, everything stopped. It wasn't the light from their flashlights. It wasn't the warehouse lights either. It was something else. Snoop Dogg had arrived, and it was clear, from the way he moved, that he wasn't here to talk. The moment the flash of light hit the room, everything seemed to freeze. The masked figures in the warehouse turned toward the door, their eyes narrowing as the unmistakable figure of Snoop Dogg stepped into the dim light, his silhouette towering over the shadows like a presence that could not be ignored. Malik's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this. He didn't even know Snoop Dogg knew where they were. But there he was, moving toward them with his usual cool, unbothered swagger, dressed in a black hoodie, sweatpants, and those signature dark sunglasses. Even in the midst of tension, Malik couldn't help but feel a strange comfort at the sight of him. "What's good, fam?" Snoop's voice rang out, smooth and confident, as he looked around the warehouse. His eyes scanned the group of masked figures before locking on to the one in the black suit who had been talking. Malik's mouth went dry. This is it, he thought. This is the moment. You, the figure in the black suit said, his voice suddenly dripping with venom. You're too late. We've already made our move. You won't stop us. Snoop Dogg took another step forward, unfazed, his hands casually in his pockets. I don't think you get it, man, he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. I'm not here to stop anything. I'm here to let you know that you've underestimated the wrong people. Deshaun's expression softened for just a second, a flicker of relief crossing his face. It was clear that this wasn't a coincidence. Snoop Dogg hadn't just stumbled onto their location by chance. He had come to help, and from the look in his eyes, he wasn't backing down. The figure in the suit scowled. You think you can stop this? You think you can stop what's already in motion? You're a washed-up rapper, with no real power, no influence anymore. Snoop Dogg smiled, a slow grin that spread across his face. Man, you don't know who you're talking to, he said, his tone relaxed. You think I'm just some washed-up rapper? Nah, I'm the one who's been fighting this system long before you even knew what it was. I've seen how it works, and I've seen how it fails. And now I'm here for a new generation to rise up and make sure it fails for good. Malik couldn't believe his ears. Snoop Dogg wasn't just some celebrity to him anymore. He was a warrior, a symbol of resistance, someone who had been fighting for change long before Malik even understood what that really meant. The figure in the black suit raised an eyebrow, clearly trying to assess if Snoop was bluffing. You think these kids are going to change anything? He spat. This isn't a movie. You can't just walk in here and expect things to go your way. Snoop took off his sunglasses, his eyes narrowing just slightly, revealing a look of sharpness that Malik had never seen before. This ain't a movie, my dude. It's real life, and if you want to see what happens when people who've been silenced for too long finally get a chance to speak, well, you're about to find out. The masked figures shifted, clearly unsettled by Snoop's calm confidence. For a moment, Malik thought they might back off, but then the figure in the suit gestured sharply, and the group closed in around them again, circling them. I think it's time for you to leave, Snoop, the figure in the suit said, before things get ugly. Snoop's response was a simple shrug. Man, you got no idea how ugly things can get when you try to keep people down. The tension in the warehouse skyrocketed, but before anyone could make a move, another loud noise echoed from the back of the room. It was a strange mechanical sound, like something shifting, like machinery starting to hum. Suddenly, a door on the far side of the warehouse slammed open, and several men in suits filed in, flanking the figure in the black suit. They weren't alone. Behind them, a large, steel door began to open, revealing a large, dimly lit room filled with more figures. Some were armed, others just standing still, watching. Malik's stomach sank. This was bigger than I thought. Looks like you brought your army, Snoop said, his voice still calm. But now there was a hard edge to it. You should know, man, I came with some backup too. Malik's eyes widened. He had no idea what Snoop meant by backup, but he didn't have long to think about it. The group in front of them was clearly waiting for the right moment to strike. The situation was escalating, and things were getting more dangerous by the second. Deshaun leaned in close to Malik, his voice barely above a whisper. Whatever happens, we stick together. Don't trust any of these people. Malik nodded. He felt his heart pounding harder in his chest. He was trying to stay focused, but fear and adrenaline were making it hard to think clearly. The figures in the suits were closing in, and Malik felt like they were being cornered. Just as the tension reached its peak, a familiar sound broke through the chaos. A voice, loud and clear, cutting through the warehouse like a beacon. Everybody freeze. A new figure stepped into the light. This one was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a tactical vest. His face was hard, but his presence commanded respect. It was clear he wasn't someone to be messed with, and the badge clipped to his belt confirmed it. Malik's eyes widened. It was Officer Matthews, the cop Malik had encountered earlier. The one who had arrested him was here now, and something in his demeanor told Malik that this wasn't just a coincidence. Matthews was part of this. He was in this. You're making a huge mistake, Snoop, Matthews said, his voice calm but cold. This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Snoop Dogg didn't flinch. He kept his gaze steady, even as the masked figures surrounding them tightened their circle. "You want to tell me what's going on here, Matthews? Or should I just assume this whole thing's a setup?" Matthews' lips twitched into a smirk, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he motioned to the group of men in suits. They stepped forward, surrounding Snoop and the others. "What is this?" Malik asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. "What do you want with us?" Matthews turned his eyes toward Malik, and for the first time, Malik could see something dark behind the cop's gaze. "What I want is to make sure this city stays the way it is. People like you, people who speak out, who stir the pot, they don't get to change things. Not without paying the price." The weight of those words hit Malik like a ton of bricks. Matthews was part of something much bigger than he had imagined, and whatever this plan was, it was moving faster than he could keep up with. Just then, a loud noise, like the sound of a door being slammed open, came from the far side of the warehouse again. This time, it wasn't a single figure. It was a whole group of people, moving quickly, their footsteps thunderous in the silence that followed Matthews' chilling words. Snoop Dogg turned toward the noise, his eyes narrowing. The tension in the room reached a boiling point. And then, just like that, the room exploded into chaos. The warehouse erupted into chaos, the silence shattered by the sounds of footsteps, shouting, and the heavy thud of boots hitting the concrete floor. Malik's heart raced as he tried to process what was happening. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control. Too many people, too many hidden motives, and the realization that everything Malik had been tangled up in was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Snoop Dogg stepped forward, his posture tense but composed. The men in suits, the ones who had surrounded them, began to spread out, creating a barricade. Officer Matthews remained at the center, his eyes locked onto Snoop, unblinking, as if waiting for something to happen. But Snoop wasn't intimidated. "This is over, man," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "I don't know who you're working for, but I'm not backing down. You can't keep people like Malik in the dark anymore." The masked figures moved closer, their hands on their weapons. They were clearly ready for a fight. But Snoop held his ground, his hands still in his pockets, his expression unfazed. "Listen, Matthews," Snoop continued, his voice almost conversational. "You might think you have control here. You might think you can keep people like Malik from standing up, but you're wrong. And that's why you're all gonna lose." The tension was palpable. Malik could feel his heart in his throat as he looked around, his eyes darting between the people in suits and Snoop's calm face. What could they do now? Was there any way out of this? Just then, Malik heard a familiar voice in the distance. "Everybody, move." It was Deshaun, and he was shouting, his voice sharp with urgency. Malik turned just in time to see his cousin rushing toward the back of the warehouse, a few of the masked figures following close behind. Before Malik could react, the entire room seemed to explode with noise. Snoop's voice rang out as the masked figures charged toward them, guns raised, but Snoop was ready. In one smooth motion, he pulled out a device from his pocket, something that looked like a small, sleek radio, and pressed a button. The room seemed to shake, a sudden blast of light cutting through the shadows. It wasn't just a flash, it was a signal. Malik barely had time to react as the ceiling above them groaned, then suddenly gave way, the metal beams above shaking violently. Through the haze of dust and debris, he saw them, a group of people in black suits, each of them wearing a device similar to the one Snoop had just activated. They were coming through the ceiling, rappelling down with military precision, their faces obscured by masks. "Get down," someone shouted, but it was too late. The room was now in full-blown chaos. The metallic clang of steel against concrete mixed with the sound of boots hitting the floor as the new group of people descended. Snoop Dogg was already moving, his body fluid like water as he dodged the charging figure and spun to block an incoming punch with his forearm. His movements were fast, too fast for someone who wasn't in the game anymore. Malik's jaw dropped. He hadn't realized how skilled Snoop was at handling situations like this. The masked figure in front of Malik lunged at him, but before Malik could react, a quick movement from Snoop knocked the figure to the ground. "You okay, kid?" Snoop asked without looking at him. Malik nodded, still stunned. I don't know what's going on." "You don't need to know everything right now," Snoop replied, spinning on his heel to avoid another attacker. "Just stay close and keep your head down." A loud crash echoed from the far side of the warehouse, and Malik turned to see Deshawn ducking behind a pile of crates, two of the masked figures in pursuit. Without thinking, Malik ran toward the crates, narrowly avoiding a blast of gunfire that ricocheted off the concrete near. Snoop Dogg looked Matthews dead in the eye. "It's over when we say it's over." As the lights finally brightened and the dust began to settle, Malik felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. He didn't know exactly what had just happened, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to be a pawn in someone else's game anymore. And that, Malik thought, was just the beginning.